Okay, welcome. I am Charlie Cowan, and you are watching RevOpsCharlie Demo Day. And today I'm very pleased to welcome Matt. Matt Hicks is the VP of Sales at Vertice. Matt, perhaps you'd like to just say hello and introduce your role and maybe a little high level about Vertice and the company.
Great. Thanks, Charlie. Good afternoon. Matt Hicks. I'm a sales leader at Vertice. Vertice is a SaaS procurement and management platform that is designed to help CFOs and business leaders to purchase, renew, and manage their SaaS and cloud tools in a more efficient manner. We've been around for a couple of years now. We're growing pretty quickly. I guess the market's switch from growth mode to efficiency mode has created a bit of a tailwind for our business as everyone looks to make their businesses more efficient. And we've found that RevOps professionals have been a great partner for our business because I guess the revenue function of a business has been one of the areas with the highest adoption of SaaS tools, but not necessarily the highest utilization. So in terms of helping RevOps professionals to make their businesses more efficient, we found a good ally in those groups.
So you mentioned there that obviously today there's this tailwind, lots of people focused on efficiency, but the company was set up a few years back, so before that occurred. So what really is the driver for companies looking at a SaaS procurement and sort of management platform a couple of years ago, and how are you seeing that has changed in terms of the types of companies that you're working with?
Yeah, so I guess when you're starting out a business, you don't really have the luxury of choosing what type of customers you work with. You try to work with, mostly smaller businesses and those where, you can provide value, and what a customer pays you is less than the value that you create for them, right? It's pretty simple. And we found that ICP in basically venture-backed firms who had been, due to their venture capital masters, they have a bias for action and moving as quickly as possible. And when you have, I guess, that operating mode, you hire and license software at a rapid pace, often at the cost of efficiency. And as a result, that was a natural kind of early target for us, kind of Series A, Series B type companies. But as our company has matured and we've listened to feedback from customers, we're now servicing customers of all different sizes, right the way up to very large enterprises. And the really encouraging thing about that journey is that this problem of cloud sprawl and the inefficiency created by licensing lots of third-party tools rather than managing monolithic on-premise systems in-house is that the inefficiency that's created by that cloud sprawl of licensing lots of third-party tools compounds with scale. So the larger you get, the more inefficient it becomes, and you have things that fall between the cracks of different departments. And eventually, when an organization is at a level of maturity that they need to look at this, they hire procurement professionals. And it's partially their job to solve this problem, partially the job of the IT managers, partially the job of the heads of departments. And again, there's no sort of ultimate ownership for who should sort of solve the problem around kind of SaaS wastage and that inefficiency that I mentioned. The other trend, which has kind of been unstoppable in the last couple of years, is that cloud spending is growing. I think Gartner reported it's growing at sort of 17% annualized in 2023, and that transition from on-premise to cloud continues to accelerate. So on one hand, you've got everybody adopting more SaaS, And on the other, you've got all of these problems that are created by the licensing of third-party tools, which is why I think the category which Vertice operates in has experienced pretty rapid growth over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's spending that money in the right place and making sure that it's getting value to the company. I know you guys create some great reports because you sit on all of this data, and I think I remember one data point that it's sales people, sales roles that are costing the most in terms of SaaS, around $9,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I think you might have some stats. Certainly I saw some about when these companies reach scale, they might have hundreds of different SaaS platforms that have come in, and so many of them doing similar things. What do you sort of see as when someone comes through Series A and then up to Series B, the types and volumes of different platforms that they're acquiring?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you have lots of very low cost software tools that you can adopt as a smaller organization. But then what you will typically find is that the features and functions of those softwares quickly become inadequate for a company when they, let's say they get to 100 people and they need to start getting some of those tools to exchange information. And that's a good time for us to catch a customer because they're then at the point where they're switching to enterprise plans. So they might have been ticking along quite nicely on a monthly rolling contract with a couple of seats. But then, they start to think about building systems which they can scale up with. So if in the sales world, that's the inevitable switch to Salesforce, which maybe is not so inevitable anymore. In finance, it might be the switch from a bookkeeping software to an ERP. So, Xero or QuickBooks to NetSuite. And within the product and engineering functions, there's a plethora of different tools which you might start to adopt as your developer team increases in size and becomes more complex. So it's really interesting. Each department has its own set of challenges, but there does seem to be an inevitability around the switch from these low cost, super easy to get started with tools to these kind of much more complex and configurable enterprise tools. And that's really where Vertice and Vertice's service becomes most valuable, is when you're making that switch.
So how does someone normally get in touch with you, and who is that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our product is very focused on finance leaders. So we've deliberately not built this around IT because SaaS and cloud has become such a large portion of a company's operational expenditure. Often it's the second largest after people or headcount, particularly with the reduction in real estate costs that we've seen in the last couple of years. So we're talking about a very, very significant portion of a company's operational expenditure. And it's famously obscure. The details are famously obscured from finance people's control. And I'll give you an example. We started working with a very large retailer recently, and they had, something like 100 million in total OpEx and about 15 million in software costs, which were categorized as operational expenditure. And across that 15 million in operational expenditure for software, it was about 250 vendors. And the CFO admitted to not having the foggiest what any of those vendors did. He said they all had pretty wacky names, and he received bills for them on an annual or a monthly or quarterly basis, and the bills always went up by between 5 and 10%, and there wasn't very much they could do about it, basically. And because they had this other sort of 90 million in other costs, the focus of his procurement team, because this was a gentleman who had a procurement team of about 4, they were focused on making sure that the operational expenditure outside of software, which was a dozen or so suppliers making up the bulk of the cost, they were focused on that area. And this 250 vendors making up the 15 million was they just didn't have time to deal with that. So as a result, they were getting overcharged by the reps at all of these vendors, and they weren't achieving the best discounts. They had desperately inefficient usage. So some tools which had very, very low usage, but they were licensing hundreds, if not thousands of seats, and crossover across the board. So the same tool tools that carried out the same functionality across different departments. So we've been in that customer for about 6 months, doing a bit of a cleanup, and we're estimating savings of 4 million in the first year. So it's some pretty substantial efficiency gains that can be achieved through the platform.
So that's 4 million out of 15 million. So it's the 30 odd % out of what they're doing. And you mentioned some important things there. So there's unused licenses. So people are just over licensed. I think we need 10,000 of these, but actually we're only using 5,000. Probably unused modules as well. I bought the premium edition, but I only need a professional one.
Often bundled in a very confusing way, because this is a completely unregulated industry. There's no rules and regulations about how you package and price tools, and therefore some of these very large SaaS companies have perfected the art of extracting as much revenue as possible from customers, and a lot of those customers, it's not meaningful to them, and as a result it kind of this wastage kind of goes under the radar. But as the focus of the market has switched from top line growth to bottom line efficiency, a lot of this wastage and shelfware, it's called in the market, has come under the spotlight. And Vertice's mission is really, is Vertice doing anything like drastically unique and special that a company can't do themselves in-house? Not really, but we're deploying technology in a really sophisticated way, and we're gathering benchmarks on what a fair price should be for a lot of these SaaS tools to level the playing field, so that the power isn't sat with the SaaS vendor's sales organization. The buyer has some control and some visibility about what a fair price should be, and that's a message that generally lands extremely well with our customers.
I definitely I talk about sort of information arbitrage. It's like it's the vendor that has the information and can control this is a fair price, or this is what you need. And a CFO like the one that you mentioned there saying Monday.com, an Asana, a Zapier. I mean, how am I supposed to know what I should be doing? So I just have to assume that my business owners in the business are telling me the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, this is why I think RevOps is a good ally for us relative to IT, because there is an element within certain organizations where IT are very defensive about their fiefdom, and they know how it all works. And the CFO just gets a bill at the end of the month, and it's going up by 10% a month. And they're like, well, why is it going up? And it's, some of the engineering, the DevOps leader comes back and says, oh, well, we bought this reserved instance with AWS, and then this with these guys. And it's a different language to what the CFO is speaking. And I think one of the things that the CFOs who are, giving us good feedback on our services is that we're opening that black box for them, so that they can see, why is the cost going up by that much, and what value are we getting for that? And in many cases, the increase in the price based on overage or increased number of seat expansion isn't correlated to additional value that CFO can see, and the ROI that they can see. And that's we're basically arming those CFOs with negotiation leverage, because if they're not getting value in line with that increased price, then they need to assess what their alternatives are, basically.
And then I think one of the other things that you mentioned there was around a duplication of differently named apps that essentially do the same thing, but people have come in often from different companies. We used 6sense over here. I used Demandbase over there. And so we've now got both these things. They do a lot of the same stuff. And again, as the CFO, you don't know that duplication. So how does that kind of come about in your conversations with customers, where you're, especially in markets? I'm just thinking of sales engagement at the moment with, let's say, an outreach and a gong and sales loft and sales enablement, a lot of them now encroaching on each other's territory. How do you help guide a CFO through what is the same or isn't the same?
Yeah, well, exactly. This is where the domain experience and the having a partner that you're contracted with to provide you with insights on this rapidly evolving market, so that you can always make the best investments in technology. That's also something which is extremely attractive to our customers, and it reduces dependency on your senior leadership team, who maybe buy a tool and then they disappear off to another company, and then another leader comes in and they want a different tool, but the other tool's still there. And that's a hugely common problem we see. The CEO I spoke to the other day said, well, look, actually, I like the fact that I've got you guys, and it reduces my key man dependency. And these people who almost come into the CFO's office with a gun to their head saying, I need this and I need that. And if I don't get those tools, I can't do my job properly. Which is effectively what the market's become, because obviously people need the best technology, need to leverage the best technology to be efficient. But I think that pendulum maybe swung too far in one direction, and actually now that the CFO has got really all of the power from a perspective, a lot more scrutiny has been placed on this stuff. So we can very quickly identify duplication. So one of the things that we do is we have integrations with customers' IDP providers, so identity providers. So Google has an SSO module. Okta is probably one of the largest players in the market, and then there's Jump Cloud and 1Password and Azure Active Directory are kind of the key players. So we'll do a one-time OAuth authentication with those providers. And once we've got those credentials of the customer set up, we can basically track all of the employees across that organizations and what tools they are logging into and how frequently. And that gives us a proxy for utilization. And it also gives IT people the ability to shut down any shadow IT, so tools that perhaps people have signed up for that they shouldn't be using. So maybe they signed up for Slack, but actually the company is using Teams internally, and that would be a non-prohibited purchase, right? So it's giving finance leaders control over budgets, but also IT leaders control over, potentially unauthorized app usage. And that is a really, really powerful way of right-sizing your licenses, because obviously SaaS is now no longer a capitalized cost which can be amortized over time. It's an operational expenditure because it's monthly and it rolls and it's annual, and the price doesn't go down, it goes up. And therefore, all the accounting standards around the world have had to change, because you can't, amortize capitalized IT costs anymore. If it's a SaaS tool, it's got to be included in your operational expenditure. And as a result, it directly impacts your margin. So this is a real issue for CFOs of particularly of larger companies, because it will directly influence their EBITDA margins, and taking back control of their stuff so that they can meet their EBITDA margin goals is quite an important way in which we get them to pay attention to what sounds like an IT asset management tool, which is not really something for me. That's for our IT team. Well, it's like, well, it is, because you've got 10 million in SaaS costs and 12 million in cloud costs, and actually that's 10% of your revenue. It starts to become very meaningful if you can reduce that expenditure by 20 to 30%.
Yeah, and so thinking through then how you give that CFO that information, and if you want to share your screen or anything to show anything, feel free. I think you mentioned there you do some kind of audit up front. I'm guessing you have to go around and find out what systems are being used and what contracts exist. So how do you help a CFO initially get a handle on what their estate looks like?
Yeah, yeah, good question. So I'll share my screen. Let me know when you can see.
Yeah, I can see that.
So when we kind of get in front of finance leaders, we kind of say to them, we establish if you know if this problem exists for them, and usually the answer is yes, and they'll tell us one story or another about how some software vendor has been increasing their prices, and it's very difficult to control it. And what we offer to do for them is to benchmark some of their key vendors. So in this case, it looks like these guys are using Jamf and Salesforce and Slack. So we might say, okay, well, look, you know, all we need to do is understand how much you're paying for those tools, and we can benchmark the pricing which you've received for the SKUs that you're licensing against what we believe to be is a fair price, or the you know, the true floor pricing. So that's what we would do with the customer prior to onboarding them.
So if that's say Shadow, or it's been bought by a business unit, this task is with the customer to then go off and then go and speak to that VP of marketing or whatever and say, right, where's your contract?
Exactly. And we would just do it with a small sample initially, just to give them a feeling for like, how much are you overpaying by? Are you getting a fair price? And demonstrating value to them. Because ultimately, if you're not demonstrating value in your sales process, and you're not uncovering a potential problem which they didn't really know about, then you know, perhaps it's not going to be very compelling for them. The screen you're seeing in front of you now is when the customer's actually been onboarded. So when we onboard them, we'll connect to one of many systems. It could be their ERP, it could be their IDP provider, and we'll use that as a mechanism to discover all of their SaaS. Sometimes companies have a really, really detailed spreadsheet, and if they want to do the spreadsheet, then that's fine as well. But the idea here is, you know, the CFO or the relevant business leader, let's just say RevOps, will switch it into sales only. They can see the contracts which they might be responsible for across the business. So they've got 8 live contracts here, and over the next couple of months, you can see that Salesforce has just renewed. There's a $2.6 million contract value. We can drill down a second. We've got 6sense coming up in August, and we've got Lucia and Cognism as well. So what we would initially do is, based on the type of software it is, we would set up smart notifications so that those would push to Slack or push to email and say, hey, Charlie, you've got 6sense coming up for renewal. It's $1 million contract. But we would do that maybe 6 months in advance of the renewal. Because if you're not doing it within a meaningful time frame of the renewal, you don't have any leverage, and you can introduce competitive tension, and the vendor will increase the price on you, knowing that you can't move away from them, and you're going to have disruption to your business. And this is the trap that many customers fall into, is because they leave everything too late, they get into the auto renewal and they've got no leverage, and they're looking at a 10% price increase. And if they're any good, they'll negotiate the price increase out, but they'll still be stung with a big bill, which might not be a fair price. So this is where we're trying to help customers. And obviously that's split across every different department. Then if you actually drill into, let's just say Salesforce, in this case, you'll be able to see a summary, all of the documents, any addendums, the workflow. So who's the contract owner? In this case, it looks like a head of engineering, which doesn't seem right for Salesforce, but, and then you can add contract watchers. So these might be RevOps people or people in IT who are responsible for managing onboarding or offboarding. And you can see, if we go into the contracts themselves, what are the savings that Vertice has generated? So the initial proposed cost for Salesforce was 4.5 million in this case, and the negotiated cost, which Vertice achieves, was a 27% reduction. And that's going to show up in a savings dashboard. In this case, you can see a significant portion of the savings that have been realized by Vertice so far have been attributed to sales, which I would say is pretty true to real life. And then one of the things I mentioned earlier is like a key focus here, aside from like benchmarking the price and negotiating a fair price with the vendor, which is a huge part of how Vertice generates the outcomes that we do. The other really useful thing we do is track the utilization of the tool. And again, the way we do that is by connecting to the IDP provider and understanding, okay, you licensed a bunch of seats with Calendly, 9,000 seats in this case, but actually you only have 39% utilization. So that might not be a particularly good indication of whether that tool is how well that tool is being used. So in this case, you can see there's 1,236 users who don't log in very frequently at all. And you can actually drill down into the user level data to understand why that might be. And all of these things would inform the purchasing manager of Vertice's strategy for driving the best possible price with the vendor. So we know if we've got an over-provisioned license, then if we're going to renew the tool, we might say, well, hey, look, we licensed 1,000 seats, but only 300 are active. We would like some credits for the unused seats against the following year's renewal price. So those are some of the things that we do in order to help our customers to get those outcomes.
That's really helpful to understand that. And so you mentioned there about a sort of relationship manager. So as a customer, you have one person that you work with, but is that that one person that then negotiates across all those different vendors, or then there is a Salesforce person who's very good at negotiating with Salesforce, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that you'll have a couple of people two people who are kind of interfacing with you on a regular basis, a customer success manager who's responsible for making sure that you're onboarded properly and you're getting the maximum value from the Vertice platform. And then you'll have a purchasing director who works directly with you on vendor strategy. So understanding what you're using, are you happy with it? Are you getting good value for it? Are you paying a fair price? And then we have teams of people who interface directly with the vendors and their category specialists. So you might have CRM specialists and ERP specialists. And the reason why we have that specialization is because it's important to understand the dynamics of the market. I think, as you mentioned earlier, if you're negotiating with SalesLoft, then it's important that you know what's going on with outreach and with increasingly so with Gong as well, because there's a lot of convergence within that domain. And the way you're going to generate the best pricing is by introducing competitive tension into those scenarios. So yeah, that's kind of the service model that we operate. So we're not saying to CFOs, hey, buy our SaaS tool to solve all your SaaS problems. We have a platform, and technology is at the heart of everything that Vertice does, but we do have a consulting team and a purchasing division, which means that we're not a pure SaaS play. We're kind of SaaS plus services, because we believe that that's what drives the best outcome for customers. And there's strong evidence to support that, because SaaS management as a category, or IT asset management, has existed for a long time, and they're relatively low cost tools, but they're defined as what we would call passive, i.e. they're only as good as the IT person who's managing them. Whereas Vertice's tool is an active service. So we deploy the technology, and the technology informs how the service will be delivered. And we find that delivers the best outcomes for customers. And obviously we're looking to automate things as we go. But the one thing we do not do, and this is where we are uniquely different to many of the providers in our category, is we do not collude with vendors in any way. So we don't have commercial relationships with vendors. We're not front running volume. We're not reselling in any way. We're in the Vertice, actually, the name comes from, it means corner, or Vertice, and the reason the founders chose that name is because we're supposed to be in the buyer's corner, and as a result of that, we're not going to be monetizing both sides of the transaction, basically.
Trying to play both sides and
exactly.
caught in the middle. Yeah.
Exactly. And we're not a reseller. We don't have relationships. We know the vendors very well. And actually, based on everything I've told you so far, you might think, oh, the vendors must hate you. But actually they don't, because we're a professional buyer and they're a professional seller, and generally we'll get them to an outcome over an agreed horizon. And if you ask any enterprise seller, what would you rather have, a defined outcome over an agreed horizon or the best possible price? I think most of them would be taking the former. So I think, what we're trying to do is make the market more efficient, but also level the playing field for the buyer. The sellers already have all the help they need, and they've got huge margins and massive organizations and lots of capital. It's the buyers, I think, that are the ones that need the support.
And so you mentioned software plus services. What's the pricing model?
Yeah, so we price based on spend. So it's a pretty straightforward calculation. So we don't really work with companies with less than $250,000 spend per year, which is some sort of Series A upwards. And we have a very unique part of our terms, which finance leaders like a lot, because it protects their downside risk, and it's called a minimum savings guarantee, which basically, once we've done an audit on the customer and we've worked out how much they spend, we'll give them a price, and then we'll included within their terms, they would also get a minimum level of guaranteed savings. So let's just say they had a $50K per annum price point. We might guarantee minimum level of savings of $100K. So at the very worst, the CFO is going to get a 2x ROI on their investment, and that's a minimum level of performance. If we don't meet that level of performance, we have a reimbursement mechanism which works on a pro rata basis. So if we miss the guarantee by 50%, you're going to get 50% of your feedback. So, and the idea is to ensure that the ROI calculation is consistent no matter what. You're always going to get 2 times your money. But the average expected saving we're achieving across our portfolio of clients is about 7x. So if you make a £50,000 investment, the ROI is going to be closer to 350K in savings across your estate. And I've been amazed at how consistently we're able to achieve that level of savings or greater.
Okay, no, that's really helpful to know. And then for anyone that wants to find out more or is investigating the SaaS procurement or management space, where would be good places for them to go and research, or how do they get in touch with Vertice?
Yeah, well, I'm conscious that at the top of the call, you introduced me as a sales leader, so I'm biased. So what I would say is do your research. There's plenty of evidence out there in the market about what platform is going to be best for you, and which companies are able to get the best outcomes and have the highest customer satisfaction. In fact, the first third-party analyst report on this category was published just a couple of weeks ago. It's by a company called Lionfish Tech Advisors, which is a bunch of ex-Gartner analysts, and they've published a report on the main players in this space. So you can find that report on our website, or you can go to Lionfish's website as well. And look, one of the great things about our service is we offer an obligation-free spend audit, where we'll take a sample of your top contracts and we'll benchmark those contracts for you and produce a very professional report showing you where potential savings in your contract may exist. Lots of customers find that process extremely useful. And if they don't, maybe they're not quite ready to engage with Vertice at that moment in time, many companies will come back to us 3, 6, 9, 12 months later down the line when this becomes a priority, because we've really demonstrated value for them in that process. So, yeah.
I know that's brilliant. I'll look for that report and I'll add that to the details of the recording. Thank you very much. That's been really, really insightful. It's a really exciting space that you're in, and while every other tech vendor is shouting about the CFO being involved in every single one of their deals. Here is something that provides real value straight to that CFO. So really exciting space, and it was great to get some insight and see the platform itself.
Thank you, Charlie. I've enjoyed coming on.
No worries. Thanks very much, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.